Imagine a room lit only by the pale glow of a phone screen. The clock strikes 2 a.m., and yet you are still scrolling. Notifications flash like little sparks in the dark, each one promising something new, something urgent, something that might distract you from the creeping unease that has settled in your chest. You don't know why you feel drained, why every task seems heavier than it should, why the world feels simultaneously overwhelming and dull. On the surface, life appears normal. You go to work, you talk to people, you eat, you sleep. Yet beneath the facade, a quiet erosion is happening. This is not fatigue from activity, but fatigue from overstimulation, distraction, and the constant refusal to face the discomforts that are part of being human. What we often call weakness is rarely what it seems. Society whispers that you are weak because you fail, because you procrastinate, because you cannot keep up. But Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychologists to study the human mind, would suggest something deeper. The mind becomes fragile not because life is hard, but because it has been left unfortified. The modern mind, with all its comforts, all its conveniences, all its endless stimulation, has rarely been tested in the ways that truly matter. And it is this lack of testing, this avoidance of discomfort, that leaves us vulnerable when real challenges appear. Consider the illusion most people live under. I am weak because the world is too much. And then consider the truth Jung presents. The world is the same for everyone. The difference lies within us. A mind that has faced its shadows, that has sat in silence, that has felt boredom, loneliness, and discomfort without fleeing, can endure almost anything. A mind that has been protected, coddled, distracted, or numbed will crumble at pressures that would scarcely affect someone who has built inner resilience. Look around, and you will see the symptoms of this invisible weakening everywhere. Emotional volatility, laughing one moment, tearful the next, often over trivial provocations. The compulsive need for external validation, likes, approval, praise, as if our own judgment is insufficient. The inability to sit alone with one's thoughts without feeling anxious or restless. Overstimulation from media, news, entertainment, and social comparison, leaving the mind constantly buzzing, never silent, never at rest. These are not trivial signs. They are the cracks forming in the foundation of the psyche. Jung would argue that this is the unconscious mind screaming for attention, for integration, for confrontation with the neglected aspects of the self. Why do we run from these shadows? Because facing them is uncomfortable. To confront the darker, unacknowledged parts of our personality, the envy, the rage, the selfishness, the fears, is to invite chaos into our carefully constructed lives. And yet, Jung would say, the chaos is already inside us. By avoiding it, we merely allow it to grow in secret, shaping our decisions, distorting our perceptions, and quietly undermining our strength. Avoidance is the silent architect of fragility. Now imagine a different scenario. Imagine sitting in that same room, but instead of scrolling, you sit in stillness. You allow the silence to speak. You observe the mind's discomfort without trying to flee from it. You notice the thoughts that arise: fear, doubt, insecurity. You do not act on them. You do not escape. You simply watch, and in watching, you begin to see yourself more clearly. This is the first step toward fortifying the mind. Strength is not built in the absence of discomfort, but in the conscious encounter with it. Just as iron is forged in fire, the human psyche is strengthened in confrontation with its own shadows. The modern world, however, tempts us in every direction to avoid this confrontation. Notifications, endless entertainment, superficial social interactions, the pressure to perform, the constant barrage of new information. They all act like soft sedatives on a mind that could otherwise be hard, resilient, and awake. We tell ourselves, I am too busy, or I am too tired. But often we are not avoiding fatigue from work or life. We are avoiding ourselves. And the tragedy of this avoidance is that it leaves us ill-prepared for the inevitable challenges that life does not pause for. Illness, loss, failure, betrayal, disappointment, these things will come. The question is, will you meet them with an unfortified mind, trembling and reactive, or with one that has endured its own inner darkness and emerged stronger. The paradox is clear. The very comforts designed to make life easier often make the mind weaker. By numbing ourselves, we trade temporary relief for long-term fragility. The mind, like the body, requires resistance, tension, and effort to grow stronger. Just as muscles atrophy without use, the psyche shrinks when we avoid the work of self-knowledge and emotional courage. Jung would insist that every person carries a shadow, those parts of themselves they refuse to see, acknowledge, or accept. And this shadow, if left unexamined, quietly dictates choices, sabotages relationships, and leaves the mind unprepared for trials. Even our language reflects the misunderstanding. We speak of stress as if it is an enemy, when in fact it is a teacher. We label procrastination as laziness, when often it is the avoidance of internal conflict. We call emotional fragility a defect, when it is a symptom of an untested mind. And because we mistake symptoms for identity, we feel shame, guilt, or resentment at our own weakness, further reinforcing the very fragility we seek to escape. To begin fortifying the mind, one must first recognize the illusion of weakness. You are not weak because life is hard. You are weak because you have been unprepared to meet it on your own terms. This is not a condemnation. It is an invitation. It is an acknowledgement that within you lies the capacity to endure, to confront, and to transform. Strength is not a state to be stumbled upon. It is a practice, a journey, a daily choice to face the shadows, to endure discomfort, and to cultivate a mind capable of bearing reality as it is. And so, the night stretches on. The phone lies untouched. The mind, once restless, begins to observe itself. Thoughts arise. Emotions surge. Memories, regrets, anxieties, they come, as if the universe itself is testing the inner boundaries you have yet to build. And instead of fleeing, you stay. You breathe. You witness. You endure. The act is simple, yet profound. It is the beginning of fortification. The first hammer striking the raw iron of the psyche. By the end of this night, a subtle transformation has begun. Not because life has changed, not because external circumstances have shifted, but because something within you has. You have met a fraction of your own shadow, and in that meeting, the mind has gained a fragment of its own strength. Jung would say this is the threshold of individuation, the journey of becoming whole, of integrating the parts of yourself you have long avoided. A strong mind is not something you are born with. It is forged. It is shaped in the quiet hours of confrontation with yourself, in the willingness to endure the discomfort that others flee from, in the disciplined observation of your own inner chaos. And it begins in moments exactly like this, a restless night, a wandering mind, a choice to face rather than escape. You do not become strong by avoiding life's challenges, Jung would remind us. You become strong by becoming the kind of person who can face them. And in that truth lies both tension and hope, the tension of the trials ahead, and the hope that, if the mind is willing, it can meet them without crumbling. The mind that has been untested, unexamined, and overstimulated drifts through life like a ship without an anchor. It bends with every gust of circumstance, every opinion, every emotional surge, never finding solid ground. Carl Jung would suggest that the anchor of the psyche lies not in comfort or distraction, but in conscious self-knowledge, the willingness to meet what has been hidden, repressed, or denied. He called it individuation, the lifelong process of becoming the fullest version of yourself by integrating the unconscious parts of your psyche into conscious awareness. In other words, true mental strength is not built by avoiding the dark, confusing, or difficult parts of life, but by embracing them, understanding them, and incorporating them into your sense of self. Imagine a mind that never faces its own shadow. It will always be pulled by unseen forces. Envy arises unbidden. Anger bursts uncontrollably. Fear dictates choices. These reactions are not accidents. They are unconscious directives from the parts of ourselves we refuse to see. The shadow, Jung insists, is not an enemy. It is a part of you, and the longer it is ignored, the more power it wields. Only by looking directly at the shadow can the mind reclaim authority over itself. This is the first principle of mental fortification. Avoidance creates weakness. Confrontation creates strength. The second principle emerges when we consider the contrast between external success and internal architecture. In the modern world, achievement is often equated with strength. We admire those who climb corporate ladders, gain recognition, or display charisma and confidence. Yet, Jung and Nietzsche would caution that external accomplishment is no substitute for inner resilience. Nietzsche wrote that one must have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. Life is inherently unpredictable, chaotic, and often unjust. A person who has spent years crafting a perfect public image while neglecting the inner self will crumble under pressures that have nothing to do with performance, loss, betrayal, mortality. True strength comes not from what others see, but from the solid structure built quietly within: self-knowledge, emotional awareness, and moral clarity. Consider the ego, that fragile construct that most of us mistake for the self. The ego thrives on image, on approval, on certainty. It is unprepared for reality's harshness. Jung distinguished the ego from the self, the totality of conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. The ego fears the shadow. The self embraces it. When the ego encounters a challenge it cannot control, it shatters. The mind that has been fortified through conscious integration, however, can face the same challenge without fracturing. It has a depth, a weight, a center of gravity that allows it to remain stable, even when the external world is turbulent. Modern human patterns illustrate this beautifully. We have become addicted to stimulation. We avoid silence because silence invites reflection. We avoid solitude because solitude invites self-confrontation. We avoid discomfort because discomfort exposes the parts of ourselves we would rather ignore. In each of these avoidances, the mind loses strength. Every instant of avoidance is a lost opportunity to engage with the reality of oneself. Every distraction is a small weakening of the mental architecture that Jung describes. And yet, there is hope. Each act of deliberate confrontation, each moment spent in reflection, each choice to endure discomfort, becomes a brick in the foundation of a mind capable of bearing life as it comes. The process of fortification also involves recognizing patterns that are universal across humanity. Everyone experiences fear, shame, anger, and desire. Everyone has hidden impulses they would rather deny. The difference between those who crumble under life's pressures and those who endure lies not in circumstance, but in engagement. Those who endure have taken the time to map their own inner landscape, to acknowledge the unconscious currents that influence behavior. They have named their fears, confronted their shadows, and learned to act with awareness rather than reaction. In this, Jung's psychology becomes not merely theory, but a practical guide to resilience. Jung's teachings are amplified when combined with the insights of other thinkers. Viktor Frankl observed that humans can endure almost anything if they find meaning in it. Nietzsche reminded us that suffering is not only inevitable, but necessary for growth. Alan Watts illustrated the danger of identification with the ego and the liberation that comes from seeing oneself as part of the greater flow of life. Together, these perspectives reveal a profound truth. The mind's strength is not measured by comfort, ease, or uninterrupted happiness, but by the capacity to face reality fully, to integrate suffering into one's understanding, and to act with wisdom despite the chaos of existence. Practical fortification involves more than intellectual comprehension. It requires conscious exercises of the mind. Reflection, meditation, journaling, and disciplined solitude are all ways to meet the unconscious. Consciously choosing to face fears, sit with discomfort, and engage with one's shadow are daily practices that slowly transform fragility into resilience. Even small acts, saying what is true when it is difficult, acknowledging an uncomfortable emotion rather than numbing it, contribute to a growing mental gravity. Each deliberate act is a strike of the hammer forging the iron of the psyche. The contrast between untested minds and fortified minds is striking. The untested mind reacts to life like a puppet, pulled by every stimulus, every opinion, every fear. The fortified mind perceives the same events, the same chaos, and moves with intention. It feels emotions fully, but is not dominated by them. It faces failure without collapse. It endures solitude without despair. It navigates uncertainty with a steady center. Jung's map of mental strength is therefore not an abstract concept. It is a lived experience, a framework for navigating life with clarity, courage, and depth. Perhaps the most profound insight is that the process of fortification is never complete. The mind is a living system, constantly encountering new challenges, new shadows, new opportunities for growth. This is not a cause for despair, but a source of empowerment. Every difficulty is a chance to test the foundations you have built. Every encounter with fear a chance to deepen your integration. Every moment of reflection a chance to expand your capacity for resilience. In this ongoing journey, the mind becomes more than a reactive mechanism. It becomes a fortress, a sanctuary, a center from which life can be faced without terror. The tension between internal and external worlds becomes clear. External circumstances will always be unpredictable, chaotic, and beyond control. The mind's fortification, therefore, is not about controlling the world, but about controlling one's response to it. A strong mind does not live in illusions of safety or certainty. It lives in the acknowledgement of reality's unpredictability and in the cultivation of inner structures capable of enduring that unpredictability. It is a mind that says, silently and with confidence, no matter what happens, I am prepared within. As we consider Jung's map of mental strength, we realize that life's challenges are not enemies to be feared or avoided, but mirrors reflecting the state of our inner architecture. Each obstacle reveals where the mind is weak, where the shadow remains unintegrated, where fear has taken root. And each confrontation, each act of courage, each moment of deliberate attention strengthens the foundation. The mind, once fragile, begins to acquire depth, weight, and resilience. It becomes capable of facing life not with anxiety or avoidance, but with clarity, stability, and presence. By the end of this exploration, a subtle understanding emerges. The mind's fortification is a journey of integration, not elimination. Strength is not the absence of fear, distraction, or difficulty. It is the capacity to navigate them consciously, with awareness and with purpose. Jung's map provides a blueprint, but the actual fortification occurs in the lived experience, through reflection, confrontation, and disciplined engagement with life itself. And so, the mind that once drifted, fragile and reactive, begins to anchor itself. Shadows are seen, chaos is acknowledged, the ego is balanced with the self, and inner structures are reinforced. The mind becomes a place where challenges are met, not avoided, where reality is embraced, not feared, where life is navigated not as a series of crises, but as a continuous, deliberate encounter with the fullness of existence. The foundation is laid. The work has begun. And the journey toward fortifying the mind, though ongoing and demanding, has a clarity, a purpose, and a profound philosophical depth that can transform not just how we live, but who we become. The night is still. The mind that once spiraled in confusion now rests in a quieter, more focused place. The chaos of thought has not disappeared, but it no longer pulls like an uncontrollable current. It has become a part of the landscape, something to observe rather than something to fear. In the stillness, something shifts. The mind begins to remember that it is not a passive observer of life's events, but an active participant in its own transformation. And this is where the work of fortification truly begins, not in the absence of difficulty, but in the conscious, deliberate act of facing it. To forge a strong mind, one must first understand that growth does not come from avoidance or evasion. Strength is not found in moments of peace and ease. It is shaped in the fire of discomfort, in the pressure of life's challenges. Just as a blacksmith hammers iron into shape, the mind is forged through experiences that challenge its current form. This is not a metaphor. It is a reality. Without struggle, without resistance, the mind cannot grow. It will remain soft, fragile, susceptible to every external influence. The first step in fortification is simple: seek discomfort. But this is not a call to reckless suffering or unnecessary hardship. It is the invitation to embrace the discomforts that are inevitable and necessary for growth. The discomfort of facing difficult truths about yourself. The discomfort of enduring failure without collapsing. The discomfort of feeling fear and moving through it anyway. The discomfort of confronting the parts of your psyche you have long ignored or denied. In the absence of these challenges, the mind remains idle, a vessel adrift in a sea of distractions and illusions. Consider for a moment the idea of facing one's shadow, those parts of the self that remain hidden in the unconscious, those fears, desires, and impulses that we would rather not acknowledge. Jung described this as the central task of individuation, to bring the unconscious into consciousness, to integrate the parts of ourselves that we have rejected or disowned. The shadow is not something to be destroyed or eliminated, but something to be understood and accepted. When we fail to face it, we project our shadow onto the world, blaming others for the very qualities we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. But when we confront our shadow, when we sit with our darkest parts, our deepest fears, our most uncomfortable emotions, we begin the work of transformation. We turn what was once a source of fragility into a source of strength. It is in this process that the mind begins to transform. The passive, reactive mind that was once subject to the whims of emotion, external circumstances, and unconscious impulses becomes an active, intentional force. It does not deny its fears, its weaknesses, or its limitations. It acknowledges them. It does not run from discomfort. It walks directly into it. It does not shy away from the unknown. It meets it with curiosity and courage. This transformation is gradual, often imperceptible, but it is real. The more we engage with our discomforts, the more we endure our own internal struggles without turning away, the stronger the mind becomes. This strength is not built through brute force or by forcing oneself to be constantly busy. It is built through discipline not to fill every moment with distraction, not to numb every emotion with activity or substances, not to avoid the pain of facing one's truth. The discipline of the mind is the discipline to sit in silence, to reflect, to confront. It is the discipline to take full responsibility for your own emotional life, to not project your feelings onto others, and to not give in to the impulsive reactions that have governed your life for so long. It is the discipline to create rituals that foster mental clarity, to form habits that strengthen the psyche, and to set boundaries that protect your inner peace. The mind becomes stronger not by controlling external circumstances, but by controlling its relationship to them. Life, as Nietzsche reminds us, will never be predictable or easy. It will always be chaotic, challenging, and often painful. But we do not have to be at the mercy of life's unpredictability. We can choose how we respond. The strong mind is not one that remains untouched by life's blows, but one that can withstand them. It is the mind that, when faced with loss, does not collapse in despair, but finds meaning even in suffering. It is the mind that, when faced with fear, does not freeze in paralysis, but moves through it with courage. It is the mind that, when faced with uncertainty, does not panic, but remains centered and grounded in the knowledge that it is capable of handling whatever comes its way. This shift from fragility to strength happens through a series of small, deliberate actions. It happens when you choose to rise early and face the day with intention, instead of hitting the snooze button and allowing the day to control you. It happens when you choose to speak your truth, even when it is difficult or uncomfortable, instead of hiding behind the mask of politeness or conformity. It happens when you choose to set boundaries, to say no when you need to protect your energy and your peace. It happens when you choose to sit with discomfort, whether it is emotional pain, physical discomfort, or the fear of the unknown, and face it with courage instead of fleeing from it. Over time, these small acts accumulate, like water carving its way through rock. Each act of discipline, each act of courage, each act of self-reflection builds the strength of the mind. The more you practice, the stronger the mind becomes. It becomes a steady force, unmoved by the turbulence of external events. It becomes a place of clarity, where decisions are made with wisdom, where actions are guided by purpose, and where emotions are observed but not controlled by the fluctuations of external circumstances. There is another layer to this transformation, the cultivation of meaning. Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of a concentration camp, wrote that those who could find meaning in their suffering were the ones most likely to survive. He argued that while we cannot always control our external circumstances, we can always choose how we respond to them. The strong mind is not only resilient, it is meaningful. It finds purpose in even the most difficult situations. It understands that suffering, while unavoidable, can be transformed into something that strengthens the soul.